Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our very special kickoff for adult summer reading. I'm Kira Barrett. I'm the director here at Darien Library, and I'm so thrilled to be doing this this evening with you and these incredible authors doing what I know we all love best, which is talking about great books. Now, before I officially introduce our very special guest, I have just a couple thank yous and housekeeping notes. First of all, a shout out to all of our Zoom attendees, as well as our in-person attendees who are right upstairs in the Darien Library's conference room attending the viewing party. I understand that the people here in person are enjoying some very special signature Diamond Eye cocktails and other fancy refreshments. So cheers to you. And if you are at home, please grab a beverage of your choice and cheers. I also have to thank members of our adult programming and our reader services teams for planning and organizing and hosting tonight's event. I don't have to tell you how truly amazing our librarians are, how creative and knowledgeable and really fun they are. So my hat tips to Pat Sheary, our head of adult programming, and her team, including Joanne Gabriel, Kathleen Millard, Marianne Paternity, and Amanda DeMeo, and Pat Tone, who is our head of reader services, and her amazing team who were instrumental this evening, including Virginia Grubbs, Jill McGuire, and Colleen Woods. I also would like to thank our very dear friends at Barrett Bookstore for co-sponsoring tonight's event. We are so lucky to have such an amazing, strong, very knowledgeable independent bookstore right here in Darien in our backyard. And did you know that every event, workshop, program, and class at Darien Library is made possible through the support and generosity of the Friends of Darien Library? When you donate, whether it's through our annual fund or a special event like the recent 1894 Day or the upcoming novelty in the fall, your gift directly supports all that we do here at the library. That includes all of the books and materials that we have, all of our technology, all of the online resources and database, and of course, all of the brilliant programming that we do for all ages and all stages. So thank you, Friends of Darien Library. We are so grateful, and we literally could not do what we do without you. So speaking of wonderful programs, tonight's event, as I mentioned, officially kicks off adult summer reading. This year's theme is Make a Splash, and I strongly encourage you to walk or swim or splash on into Darien Library as soon as you can to pick up a game card. You can also do it online at darienlibrary.beanstack.org, not beanstalk, Beanstack. It's really easy and it's so much fun. The more you read, the more chances you have to win fabulous prizes at the end of the summer. You do have to be 18 years or older to play, but if you are 18 or younger, we got you, because we also have a children's library program for summer reading and a teen one. So stop in and we can tell you about those as well. Speaking of prizes, every single person attending tonight, whether you're attending via Zoom or at our viewing party, you have been automatically entered into the end of the summer grand prize raffle, and that's going to be announced at the end of the summer in August. But you also are entered tonight into a giveaway for copies of The Diamond Eye, as well as Beatriz Williams' latest novel, The Lost Summer at Newport. So those winners of those books are going to be notified via email later this week, so keep your eye out for that. All right, that was a lot. And now it is my distinct honor to welcome and introduce tonight's guests. Beatriz Williams is the best-selling author of so many favorite books here at Darien Library, including Our Woman in Moscow, The Summer Wives, Her Last Flight, and so many more. Her books have won many awards and accolades and have been translated into more than a dozen languages. Born in Seattle, as she mentioned, she now lives here with us in the lovely Nutmeg State, and we are so happy to have her join us. Beatriz will be in conversation with our very special guest author, Kate Quinn. Kate is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of fabulous novels like The Alice Network, The Huntress, The Rose Code, and her latest, of course, The Diamond Eye, an unforgettable World War II tale of a librarian who becomes history's deadliest female sniper. Beatrice and Kate, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go away and I'll be back a little later. Thanks.
And she does know that she needs to come back in, because otherwise the danger is that we will completely lose track of time and they'll be saying, like, guys, it's 3 hours, everybody went home.
Kate and I have a little history for carrying on conversations long past the last call. So we'll do our best to like not get too carried away. Although I guess that can be kind of fun for everyone joining in at home. Well, of course, I am Beatriz Williams, and I'm a huge Kate Quinn fan, as are you all, I'm sure. Very excited when The Diamond Eye came out. When did it come out? Was it?
It came out at the end of March.
On the end of March. Okay. There was like, yes, that was, as you know, in the sort of runway to book launch, time compresses and distorts. And so, yes, end of March. Oh my goodness. So it's been a little while now. Fabulous book, obviously. And as we know, as Kira said about the sniper, a famous sniper from World War II, Ukrainian sniper, we'll talk about that, but who fought on the Soviet side in World War II. So Kate, first of all, where did you, and I'm guessing this was, as it always happens when you're busy researching something else, you find the idea for your next book. So what started you on, I guess, the research journey, and what kind of brought you to this book?
Well, just as you said, I found this book while I was researching another one. And that actually is quite often how I do find my subjects, because it's this whole thing where, especially your muse gets bored while it's, head down doing the homework for one book. So it likes to dangle new shiny ideas in front of you, just to distract you while you are, trying to get your word count done or your research goals done. So when I was researching the Huntress, that has a pretty intensive thread that involves the Night Witches, which is the regiment of all female bomber pilots that flew against Hitler's Eastern Front. And so while you are, researching and reading about one set of Soviet women war heroines, you are going to start finding information about more. And really the lead in this was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and she was, the single mother / graduate student / library researcher who turned fearsome sniper during World War II when her country was invaded, and who ended up also going on a goodwill tour to the United States, where she, just as one does, became BFFs with Eleanor Roosevelt. So I realized just right away, it's like, I couldn't believe the story was true. And I realized I've got to write this. It's not going to fit in this book, but I tucked her into my back pocket immediately and just decided, all right, I'm keeping her for later. And I ended up writing the Rose Code first. But I ended up after that thinking, all right, I think it's time for Mila's story. And that ended up being the book that I wrote in late 2020 and then early 2021, which makes it very much my pandemic book. And for the research for this book, I was very lucky that, this was really it was my first foray into what we might think of as more straight biographical historical fiction. This was 100% a real woman, and I used her real name. And I was very lucky that, she wrote her memoir later in life. And so I had her words, written down by her, and which fortunately have been translated from Russian into English not long ago. And there's an excellent English translation. So that was really the foundation of my research, was her words and what she had to say about this extraordinary life that she led.
Wow. So, and I guess, you hear the word sniper and a certain psychological profile comes to mind. And of course, we know that there have been women snipers in history, but it's not, sniping has always had a distinct role in the military. And the sniper has had a distinct personality, not always, shall we say, trusted by the rest of the people in the group, because, it's one thing to sort of, pick up your rifle and fire with everybody else. It's one thing to zero in on a single human being and kill that human being. So let's talk a little bit about the psychology here. who was she? What brought her from being a librarian to being a sniper, which, that's a whole story there. But so tell me, I guess, tell me about this psychology and how, was being a sniper something she became? Or was that kind of always there? And how do you do it? How do you deliberately kill another human being, aiming and firing at a specific human being, let's put it that way, without being in immediate danger yourself? As often with the sniper, he's not pointing the gun at you, right?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question, because that's the question I found infinitely fascinating when I was researching this. And it is true that we do have sort of a perception of what a sniper is. It's like, at worst, we kind of imagine them as, militarized serial killers. And at best, they are, the odd man out on the team of ordinary guys, the one who all the rest feel, a little bit weird about, the one who's described as having ice water in his veins. I mean, I don't know if anybody else remembers, in Saving Private Ryan, the team had a sniper and he was like the scripture quoting Southern Barry Pepper. And he was a little bit weird and everybody knew that, and he was lethal though, and he was on their side, so they're okay with that. And so I did look at that, and I was thinking, especially when you're thinking about a female sniper, I know the image that comes to your head because it came to mind. You're thinking like a James Bond villainess, with like the ice cold eyes and, the absolute all business attitude. And especially since, she's Soviet, it's like, this has to be somebody with no conscience and, no feeling. And that's the thing that was first refuted in the research, because I read about this woman. And, she was young, she was in her 20s, she had been a teen mother, she was a fierce and loving mother, she was a loyal friend, she was a bookworm, she was warm and enthusiastic, and someone who could intensely geek out about intensely geeky minor historical minutia, which is the kind of thing that I really get, because you could tell she was the kind of person who like goes on and on about like some historical thing, and like her friends are going, no idea what you're talking about. And that's something that, Beatriz, I know you get that look, and I have gotten that look from our friends. So it's like, this is someone I found myself relating to, really. And so then I thought, well, how is it that she can do this? And then, I delved deeper into, the whole sniper idea. And one reason she could do this, before even getting to what this is that she was not someone who wanted to be a sniper. She already knew how to shoot, and shoot very well, before the war even started, but she was a soldier's daughter. And when you're in the Soviet Union, you're expected to be a joiner. You're expected to go to clubs, do things, do things after work, join your friends. And so she used to casually go to the range and, shoot a little bit with friends after work. And then she decided at some point, and we don't really know why, but she decided she would take an advanced course and, get that done. But it was all sport shooting. She never had any idea of turning a weapon against a human being. And it was only ever supposed to be something that she did in competition, or, something she did for a little bit of fun, like a hobby, just the way anybody has a hobby. But then her country was invaded. And that's the thing that's important to remember. Just like Ukraine today, when your country is invaded, and not just invaded the way that the United States was invaded, like Pearl Harbor being bombed, and for the majority of us, that is thousands of miles away, and it is not an invasion that is pouring over our immediate border and into our immediate neighborhoods. It's a little bit of a different kind of invasion. Her country was invaded hugely, massively, by an overwhelming force that they must have thought that like they could not fight, and by a force, furthermore, who thought all Ukrainians and Russians were racial undesirables who needed to be swept away to make room for, the racially pure Germans. And that is the kind of thing that turns even the most peaceful single mom and library researcher into someone who's like, okay, I don't have a choice here. I have the choice to defend my country, or I have the choice to, let it roll over me. And real, and then my son grows up in the Hitler Youth learning how to sing Heil. And that was where that particular single mom drew the line in the sand and said, absolutely not. And that's why she went to war. That's why she decided, I have these skills and I can use them. And so that's why she could do what she did. But then there's also, how could she, how is it? What is a sniper's skill? And the thing that I found interesting is that, we think about sniping as being, it's like making the impossible shot from, a mile away, and you're hitting something this big and you're going to put it through there. It's not so much about making the impossible shot. Obviously you do have to have skills. And she talks a lot about how much science there is in shooting, about how you're memorizing ballistics tables and how you calculate things like lateral drift as about how much the bullet will drift once it leaves the muzzle. And, how she personalized a weapon, for her particular eyes and grip and, to make the absolute best shot. But the fact is, even though there is a lot of science in it, and even though she was a very good shot, it is less about the skills than it is about the emotional control. And it is very clear, that, a lot of people, there are plenty of people who probably were better, who might be better shots even than she was, country boys who, could sink a bullet into a dime, from a mile away, 10 times out of 10, but they don't have the emotional control and detachment to be able to do what you were talking about, focusing on a face through your sights, being close enough to that person through the sights that you can see, did they shave that morning? Are they careless with their uniform, or are they tidy? And to be able to pull that trigger and to be able to keep doing that day after day, week after week, month after month, it takes a toll, and it takes detachment, and it takes a certain kind of emotional, resolve and steadiness. And that is what she had. And she had that to a degree that did enable her to keep doing this job with a steadiness and a steadfastness that really made her the best. And I always did think that's a little ironic, considering, women are supposed to be the over emotional ones, but she was the one with the emotional control to do this very difficult job for a long time under the most stressful of circumstances. And I really did find that was, she did say it was difficult at first, in the sense that, the first time she had to fire on a human being, she missed her first few shots. And, she said it took 7 bullets to take down 2 targets. And that is, I can shoot much better than that. That's embarrassing for me. And yet she said at the same time, but it is a different thing when you go from firing on a wooden target to firing on a human being, and there's no use pretending it's not, or firing on a deer or an animal or for hunting. So she did, and most of the other, because there were other women snipers beside her, they all described the same thing. That first time is really hard. But the thing is, you had to get over that. You had to become accustomed to it. You had to train yourself to think of, these people are the invaders. They will kill you if things were turned around. And there was the fact too that snipers knew that they had a very bad time of it, even worse than most if they were taken prisoner by the Germans. Russians already, if they were captured by Germans, were treated the worst of any POWs. They were routinely starved and executed in the camps in a way that the French, German, and English and Americans, or French, English, and Americans were not. But the snipers, since everyone hates snipers, it's pretty much the thing of like, if they catch you, you're dead. You're just going to be shot right there. You will not be arrested. And for the women snipers, let's just say they knew there something else would happen to them before they were killed. And they all knew that, and Ludmilla was told that. And that's why she kept a pistol on her belt, which was just a little 8-shot. And she said, you always keep a pistol on you, because the first 7 shots are for if you get closed on, and that's to try to fight your way out. And the last one is for you, so you're not taken alive. And knowing that about the enemy, she was able to, start pushing that, going into that, place where she was able to do her job and just regard herself as, a person with a job, rather than seeing necessarily the horrendous cost of it. Although the thing I liked about her was that she did not take joy in it. She was not one of these snipers you read about sometimes who are like keeping a kill count on their, carving notches on their gun or anything like that. She seemed to be really quite, she had distaste for fame that she started to accrue. She did not think it was appropriate. She just simply saw herself as a soldier with a job to do, and she was doing it. And that was all it was. So very long answer. I'm sorry, but that was a complicated question with a lot of parts.
I know. To me, this is, it is fascinating because, to me, it is always the psychology that is really the most interesting, and the plot and the cat and mouse and the chase is all kind of part of how you're bringing out the psychology of these characters who are the center of the story. And digging deeper into that and thinking about this, emotional detachment and this ability to I guess dissociate yourself emotionally from what you're doing, the implications of what you're doing, and obviously taking into account that these are invaders, these are people who are going to kill you. Do you think that her experience as a Soviet citizen, she's a Ukrainian, but she is a Soviet citizen, in the years leading up to World War II, is part of her ability to detach? And I say this because as part of my own research, as you know, I'm also doing a lot of Cold War stuff right now. I'm reading a lot of Anne Applebaum and Red Famine. I mean, really Stalin killed more Ukrainians than Hitler killed in the in the concentration camps. I mean, and layered on top of that, you have the purges, and you have the killing of political enemies, let alone the kulaks. So to what extent is the paranoia and I guess the atmosphere of betrayal part of what goes into her ability to remain emotionally detached and have that that necessary ability to stay calm and take care of business and not get caught up in, I guess, the human aspect of, oh my God, I'm literally killing somebody?
Well, it's one of those things that, it's one of those things that we don't necessarily understand as well because, as Westerners, but it's one of the big beliefs that the Russians of her generation were raised with, was the idea that war is coming. You were literally raised with this idea that, there will be a war to come, of course. And, when the call comes out, you will, of course, meet it. And, given that her father was a soldier and a decorated one, and he did talk about the war to come. And she said when she was young, she was sort of like, oh, Papa, that's not going to happen. But then war came out. And she said one of the first things she thought was, my father was right. And so she already had, like many young people, there was an expectation that, war is coming. And that was, a useful thing that Stalin put out to, make his people protective of their country and what it could become. So there was already a sense that there wasn't near as much shock by the Soviet civilians like her by the idea that they could be invaded. Yes, they were shocked that Hitler did it because he turned on them and because it happened very quickly. But there wasn't the sense of like, this can't happen to us, that it would maybe be for Westerners, certainly for Americans. It was more like, we've been told about this our entire life, and here it is. So there is that, for one thing, that this is something that Stalin tried to prepare his people for, and he did do that successfully. Now, the thing for Ludmilla, and it is a little awkward because she was Ukrainian born, and she was, her fighting was done on Ukrainian soil, but her father was Russian, and she was a city girl, as she self-professed, as she said. So she was not part of, the terrible famines that took place in the Ukrainian villages and the farming communities, where so many were starved by Stalin. And her view of the state was a little more positive because of partly her upbringing and partly because in the cities, the grip of, the state was a lot stronger. And so therefore she did, she was not one, it seems, to question the Soviet Union and the fact that Ukraine was part of it. which is a little bit awkward right now, considering that, Ukraine and Russia are very much at odds, and for very good reason. And considering the ugliness of Russia's treatment to Ukraine, not just now, but during the 20s and 30s and the famines. But the fact is that, we're also thinking about the way that the Russians and certainly Stalin controlled propaganda, and they controlled what their people knew. We're even seeing that now, when we're seeing that, that there are, Russians who are not knowing nearly as much as they should about the truth of what is happening in Ukraine. And we know that, and that we're in the era of social media. Back then, the news was far more tightly controlled. So she probably did think, that Stalin was not a bad leader. And she probably did think she would not have had much cause to know that there were these massive purges and famines happening as much, or if she did know, it was more like, well, there are of course adjustments and there are terrible starvations that happen, but things will be better, because that's also part of the Soviet mindset, is the training yourself to see the world not as it is, but as we will make it. The idea that everything is going to be better as long as, we all follow the rules and, do things right. And it was a little bit of a struggle getting into that mindset, because, it's very different from the Western mindset. If she had rebellious thoughts about the Soviet Union, she kept those to herself. And she would not have put those in her memoir, because that memoir was published and it was viewed by the censors. And so that's the kind of thing that it is also a reason why in this book, I started every chapter with my memoir, the official version, and there will be some very propaganda heavy version of whatever it is that she's currently going to talk about in this chapter. And then it's my memoir, the unofficial version. And that's, what really happened. And I put that in as a way to try to, signal to the reader that the memoir, as useful as it is not the whole story. And I know that, the real Ludmilla and her life, there are certainly things that she felt she could not put in the memoir, or things that she left out, or things that happened that were probably changed on her. But living in the Soviet Union is a different thing. And the thing that I take away from this, and especially with her loyalties, is that her fighting was done on Ukrainian soil. She did love her homeland. And even if she did also, not really question that it was part of the Soviet Union, I really do believe that, she would be still defending her homeland if she were in a modern day woman fighting today. And it certainly has not surprised me at all, the toughness and the resilience of the average Ukrainian citizen, and certainly the Ukrainian women, when they have been fighting back against another brutal invasion of their home. And the thing that honestly has really warmed me is that how much Ukraine has really embraced her as a heroine of their own, rather than saying, no, she was Russian, she's not one of us. It's like, no, she was Ukrainian. They say she is one of us. And anytime you see an article about Lady Death online, go to the comment section and, well, if you scroll past the guys who are saying there's no way a woman could do any of that, and it was just, totally made up, you will immediately find some comment very quickly of someone who says she was not Russian, she was Ukrainian. And it really has warmed me to see how much that they have claimed her as a war heroine for Ukraine and not for Russia.
Yeah, I know there's so many issues to struggle with as a writer when you're doing this. You're the level of propaganda control, not to sort of get, deep dive into the politics here, but the level of propaganda control that Stalin is having over the Soviet people is not dissimilar to the level of propaganda control that Hitler is having over the Germans. So, it is such a struggle as a writer to find this humanity in there and say, hey, to what extent are we culpable or not culpable? And I think obviously if you're talking about a woman who is Ukrainian and who is perhaps shielded from a lot of what is going on in the Soviet Union at the time, but at the same time, this is part of what brings us to where we are today, because the population did accept the line. Oh, there were no war atrocities committed by Soviet troops going into Germany, and so now we have these same atrocities repeating themselves in Ukraine again all these years later, because there's never been an accounting for that in the Soviet Union, in the former Soviet Union, and even in Russia today. But that obviously doesn't take away from the heroism of a woman essentially defending her homeland from invasion. I think that's something that anyone can can applaud and find heroic, even in the middle of all these very complicated moral issues that we're now dealing with, and all the chickens coming home to roost. So
that is very much how I decided to do it and write it, is that, for one thing, and I was very glad for this, Ludmila's fight takes place entirely really in the first 18 months of the war. Mm-hmm. And that is where the Soviet Union, the Red Army, they're very much on their back foot. They're being pushed back all the time. They are losing. They're losing horribly. They are being killed by hundreds of thousands and even millions. And it is just a very bleak time. And this is not the later part in the war where they were pushing back into Poland and then, toward Berlin into Germany. And, the Red Army did commit horrific atrocities against civilians. And I don't care how many times they say, oh, that's just propaganda against us. No, it happened. And Ludmila was not part of that. And I'm very glad that I did not have to find that in her memoir, because I think if I had, I would not have been able to write this book. She was a woman, though, her fight entirely happened during the time when, frankly, the Red Army was the underdog. There was no support. All they could do was fall back.
At that point, standing against Hitler. I mean, having the fight taking place on their soil at that point. And the Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement, Stalin was the only one standing up against Hitler at all. Everyone else was sort of caving in. So, to be fair on the Soviets, they were kind of, at that point, the only ones actually accepting, casualties. They were the ones that Hitler was fighting at the time, and everyone else had already been defeated.
They were, and that's one of those things. I know, and I know you've had this trouble too.
England is being bombed, of course, but
they haven't been invaded yet. And that's
on the ground. I'm certainly not diminishing what's going on in the Battle of Britain, but in terms of troops on the ground, the enemy on your soil,
And this is, I know you dealt with this too, but it's like, I have had the question sometimes of how can you make a hero out of a Soviet? They did terrible things, and I'm just like, but I have to look at the history as if if I'm looking at 1941, I cannot, for the purposes of this, of being an honest recounter of facts, look ahead to 1945, because those things have not happened yet. I have to treat the history as if it's in the moment. This and no further. I cannot look ahead to, well, they're going to do terrible things. I can only look at what has happened yet, what has happened now. And that is what I'm dealing with Ludmila. And her fight is very much one woman defending her home, which has been overwhelmingly invaded. And that is something, and you said it first, is that I think we can all get behind someone defending their homeland. That is something we can all get behind. And of course, did the Russians commit atrocities probably even in those days? Yes, they probably did. And pretty much this is what happens in war. The Germans certainly were committing atrocities against civilians as they were pushing into Russian and Ukrainian soil. So really, it's a terrible situation all around. I mean, the Germans were terrified of the Russian front, and they everything from the weather to the conditions were just monstrous to them. So they were soaking up a lot of casualties there. And it's one of those things that, if you're ever talking with a historian about, if you want to name what are the inflection points that meant that the Allies won the war, well, one of those inflection points is always going to be Hitler making the monumentally stupid decision to invade the Soviet Union. Because without that, without the Soviet Union soaking up so much of Hitler's manpower and resources, the war in the West very possibly could not have been won.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's the deal we had to make. The allies had to make was to, you know, allow Stalin and allow the Soviet Union to sort of to soak up all the blood and soak up all the lives lost, so that the West could get back on its feet and regroup and get back in the war. But that's the problem, is that nothing is black and white in these situations. But that's why we have historical fiction, in order to tease out the humanity in these in these people. So brava, Kate Quinn, awesome job.
Well, thank you. And I want to give a plug for Beatriz's book, Our Women in Moscow, which talks also about the Soviet Union, not only during the war, but post-war into the Cold War. And she does such a wonderful job with it. Please grab this book. It's out in paperback recently. And I just saw it this morning at LAX at the airport. So go grab it.
Yes. Take it for your flight, because you could be there for a while. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, no, I for some time now, the Cold War has been an obsession. Of course, it's got its roots in World War II. So yes, it's definitely. My husband, literally 2 nights ago, I'm like picking up, Anne Applebaum's Gulag, right before I go to bed. He's like, seriously, I'm sitting next to my wife and she's reading Gulag, and it's like
a little light reading.
How did we get here? Like, I know, a little light reading before bed, but so yeah, to me it is just, and the fact that it is, this whole, the entire unfolding situation in Ukraine over the winter and into the spring was like, to me, was like, yes, of course this is happening. I had seen all these, seeds that were planted so many years before, and nothing that was happening was surprising me like at all. And but that's partly because I think if we have kind of a little bit let go of our memory of the Cold War. And to be fair, a lot of that stuff is stuff we didn't even know about, because it was all classified until really very recently. And of course you had, the Kremlin had its own archives under lock and key, so we couldn't get in there. It's really only recently that we've had the ability to look in and see what was really going on. And it's just such a fascinating story. And, it's certainly, makes for, I think, a certain amount of never-ending research, because you just cannot get to the bottom of it, really.
Yeah, and it's amazing how childish it all is when you get behind the scenes, like how much happens between guys who are just sort of chesting with each other, with like little boys in a playground. That's the depressing part I have found, where it's like, really, these people were in control of the bomb and they're acting about as mature as 5-year-olds. That's some of the stuff I end up thinking about, which is sometimes why it's more fun to keep things to the battlefield, where it's at least a little bit simpler and it's not quite as depressing as the politics behind the scene. Yes. Now, which is weird to say. It's more depressing because people are dying, but behind the scene, at least on a battlefield, there's the sense that someone as smart as Ludmilla will hopefully be able to wend her way towards safety. Whereas behind the scenes, there's sometimes just a sense of like, it's also random and it's childish and bizarre. Politics are just strange.
Also, I think, as we're going to the Cold War, this was sort of such a new beast to everybody. This really essentially secret clandestine war that was going on. And, nobody had ever seen anything like that before. So it was like, how do you deal with this? How do you, I guess, fight this out without actually, troops on the ground fighting, because, that would lead to, obviously a massive disaster. So, it was, we don't realize just how close at times thank God they never did make, the catastrophic decision that, that would end humanity. So, I guess that's victory. Anyway, so tell me about, what's up next for you? I think you've given us a few hints. I don't know how many hints you're allowed to give at this point.
Well, I have a few things really in the works. I have a Cold War novel of my own, sort of, which is titled right now The Briar Club. That's going to be coming out in March or April of 2024. And that is a all-female boarding house in Washington, D.C. in the early 1950s. And, it's dealing with, really the Cold War, McCarthyism, the Red Scare, the Lavender Scare, all of these, wonderfully gritty and grist making things that novelists love so much. So I'm really enjoying that one, but I had to put it aside for a little while because I am working in the meantime on a co-authored novel with my wonderful friend, the Canadian author Janie Chang. And we are co-authoring a book together, which is titled The Phoenix Crown. And that is going to be out next fall if we make our deadline. And if that happens, then that is going to be the book that is about a New York opera singer and a Chinatown laundress who end up being thrown together with very unexpected results in the chaos of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. So that is coming up next.
I'm an opera singer, as you know. I'm a huge opera fan, and you actually were doing it. I'm just a spectator. So,
well, I'm really enjoying this because now I'm
talking about this one.
Yeah, I could write a heroine that, I don't have to like suddenly learn everything about, rifling and ballistics tables, or
actually know. And I don't have to go through an ARE where I'm like, so many opera mistakes. Someone's going to La Boheme in 1891. It wasn't out yet. Hello.
I know. Yeah, it's one of those things. Finally, I have a heroine who has a job that I don't have to research. It's like I haven't had to look up a thing. It's great.
It'll be such a relief for me because I won't have to be like, guys, come on. I could be the opera sensitivity reader. All you authors need an opera sensitivity reader. I'm your woman.
Yeah, I could be too. She's your woman in Moscow.
Exactly. Anyway, so, well, that's exciting. I'm so glad I knew about the sort of McCarthyism book, but I did not know about this new one because I've had my head in the sand doing my own writing. So
what do you have coming next? I know you just had the latest Team W book.
Yes, latest Team W book just came out. So that's The Lost Summers of Newport. That was actually going to be out in the fall. But once we came up with the title, my editor was like, so is there any way we could actually get this out by May? And we did. And it was fantastic. We had a super launch event in actually Newport at Doris Duke's mansion, Rough Point, which was amazing. It was a dream come true. And then we went on a wonderful 2-week book tour. It was Team W reunited. It was the absolute best time. We just had a ball. And it was really the first time I'd been out on the road like that, since the whole COVID thing started. So it was really terrific to be meeting readers again and signing books and hanging out with Karen and Lauren, who are my best friends, as well as my, writing companions. So we had a great time, and the book made the New York Times list. So, it all just ended on that great note where you're like, woohoo, now we go home and open the champagne. So
I honestly think
mention what the book is about, which is 3 different generations of women in Newport tied together by a mystery around a house, a fictional Newport mansion in the Gilded Age, the 1950s, and the present day, but pre-COVID, because COVID happened after we'd plotted the book out. We're like, okay, so this book is going to be 2019 for the modern day part of it. So you can just kind of speculate what happens to our modern day character the following summer. But yes, it was, as always, just a joy to write with Karen and Lauren, and we're already hard at work on the next book. So stay tuned for that.
I honestly think that's Janie and I actually have joked that that's the reason we're writing a book together, is we'd really like to take a girls trip. And this is the way we can get our publisher to take care of all the details. So it's like, can we write a book together, and then they'll send us
joking on book tour when we're like, so we wrote this book so that we could go on a publisher sponsored book tour together and have them pay our bar bill. And people were like, oh, that's so funny. And I'm like, no, really,
it's what we did.
That was the motivation.
No, the funny thing, now Janie and I just got done with a research trip in San Francisco, which is the reason why I just got off a plane this morning. And that was a lot of fun because we were head down in archives and, doing the research for this book. And it was great. We went to all these stately homes and to research our fictional Nob Hill mansion. And, it was a lot of fun, but I will say it's like, we're learning a few things for the inevitable book tour because we're thinking it's like, there are not two people on this earth more directionally challenged than Janie and me.
Oh, no.
So it's like, anytime we go anywhere, we are going to get lost. GPS was throwing up its hands in disgust and just saying, I quit on you too. So we can go on book tour, but we'll probably end up, in Helsinki when we're supposed to be, actually starting out in, hitting the Strand in New York or something like that. So who knows where we'll end up, but it'll be fun.
See, that's the problem. Karen and Lauren, we've never actually been on a research trip together. Wait, I hear there were anchovies. Where did I read this? There's like anchovies falling from the sky in San Francisco. Did you catch a few anchovies for your Caesar salad?
Okay,
No?
I didn't hear about that. We just had unexpected hot weather.
Okay.
And although the first day I got there, the Warriors victory parade was happening. So that was the first thing that hit us that meant that we could not get anywhere on time, was because we're trying to evade all these people who are crazy with victory about the Warriors winning the NBA.
Oh my gosh, so. Yes. That's good. Sorry, I forgot all about that stuff. But yeah, it's I feel like I read that story though, and I was like, oh, San Francisco, anchovies falling from the sky. It could happen.
I'm sure in San Francisco, I missed that one. No anchovies fell in my hair, at least.
Okay, well, just check, before you go to bed tonight. I said it, my son, my two sons are the only people in the world who love anchovies on their Caesar salad. So they're like, more anchovies, more anchovies. So I'm like, guys, go to San Francisco. They're falling from the sky. Anyway, this is what happens is if you let me and Kate, start chatting together, you just don't know where it's going to end up.
No idea. Okay, we have been drawn to account. Do we have questions?
We do. Although I was just cracking up here listening to you guys, and I could do that all night. But we do have a bunch of wonderful questions. I have a few in the chat from our viewing party participants. So one of the first questions is actually about research and how long on average is it different for every book? How long does it take you to research your works? And I think that's a question for both of you, since you both do so much historical fiction.
I would say for me, it depends on the book. For the Rose Code, for example, there was so much to research in that book. That was almost 4 years in the writing. From the very beginning, I wonder if I could write a book about code breakers to final draft turned in. So that felt like there was so much that I just, there was travel too. I went to Bletchley Park for that one. I had less of that to do for the Diamond Eye, which I honestly wrote in under a year, and the rough draft itself from A to Z was 3.5 months out of that year. That was fast. But that was also my pandemic book. I was using it as pure escapism. And my muse is honestly looking around me going, I really hate everything going on around me. I want to go somewhere really nice and relaxing. So how about the Eastern Front in World War II? That sounds great. And she didn't come out, which is why that book happened so fast. So that book, and also I could not travel for that book. So therefore, I was plotting sniper duels on Google Earth because that's all I could do. So that had a somewhat truncated research experience, but every book is different, I find, and it really depends on, am I going to have to travel for a book, which I can't always do, but you try if you can, and how many different things have I managed to cram in that need very specific research, and whether the research comes easily to me. As I said, I'm writing a book with an operatic heroine right now. I don't have to look up a lot about opera. When I was writing about, heroines who were in aviation, I had to look up a lot about aviation. So it depends a little bit on what the book is about and how much that's going to require out of me. How about you, Beatriz?
Yeah. What about women in Moscow? How long did that take?
Oh God, that was massive, because while I'm fairly well versed in, I guess, the 1950s in general from previous books, and the sort of social cultural aspect of things, which is sort of the vital juice inside of all my books. I knew nothing, and I actually knew less than I thought I knew about just spycraft and the mechanics of espionage and all of those things that really, I mean, I had to really, I started out with a bunch of kind of spy biographies and moved on to sort of more general Cold War books and then stuff that's like specifically spycraft, like Alan Dulles wrote a great book, The Craft of Intelligence. So Alan Dulles was sort of the main guy in the OSS, which is the CIA predecessor. During World War II, he was based in Switzerland, and then he ended up later in the 1950s as head of the CIA. So he was kind of there, like right at the cusp of World War II, and he had a lot to say once he retired after the Bay of Pigs fiasco about intelligence and spycraft and as much as he could say, obviously, about that early part of the Cold War and that struggle. So there was all of this stuff and a lot of stuff you just kind of pick up along the way. There's a lot of lingo and that you think but you don't actually know. So yeah, that it did take a while, and then just layering on top of that is like, okay, writing a spy, there's just so, especially when you are writing from the imagination and not writing from actual events. Wow. I mean, I had more what I call shower time, when you're in the shower going, okay, now what the hell do I do? And that, I mean, just the intricacies of plotting out a book like that, I think took up just as much as the actual physical research time. And so it made like the writing was really the easiest part of that entire experience. And then I was like, no more spy books ever. And well, no, sorry.
Famous last words.
I broke that promise very quickly.
Kate, if you had, this is another question from our chat. If you had the chance, what would you ask the real life Mila?
Oh, that's nice. I'm not sure. I kind of would like to ask her, what happened to some of the people that, she brings up in her book, in her memoir, but she doesn't say what happened to them. And I had to guess whether they lived or died. There's that. I want to ask, like, why doesn't she mention her third husband at all? Like, why? Like, is she trying to hide something about him? I had to create an answer for that too. It's in the book why, and in my author notes specifically. But I think what it comes down to overall is that I would love to ask her, did I get you right? Because was I anywhere close? Because I'm very aware that, my version of Ludmila Pavlichenko is just that. It's my version. Like it is still fictionalized to some degree, because I have to put thoughts in her head, because it's not like her memoir tells us every single thought she was having. And I have to make decisions for the story, because you do have to make decisions in order to figure out who is this person on the page and do they make sense. But, it's just conjecture, even when you're working off of something like a memoir. And I guess I would love to ask her, with great, great respect and not a little trepidation, was I anywhere close? And do you hate what I did with you? Or do you like what I did with you? Or what? I guess that will be fun. And I guess maybe to finish it up, I would like to ask, really, what was it like being, like having private girl time with Eleanor Roosevelt? And what were those conversations like? Because that was astounding to me.
Kate, this is another question, I guess, without spoiling the ending for anyone who hasn't finished the book. Did you write more than one ending, or did you have that all mapped out?
Yes and no. I knew how the story was going to end, and that ending pretty much happened. But the whole plot point that I had was sort of like there was an assassination attempt that wraps around the story. That didn't come till my second draft, and that's the reason for that was just that it didn't feel like there was enough happening in the second part of the book. It felt like it was falling just a little bit flat. And I ended up, then reading a little bit about the fact that Roosevelt survived an assassination attempt early in his presidency, which, missed him, but it killed the mayor of Chicago standing right next to him. And also that Roosevelt also managed to get through a what they call the business plot, which was a plot by a entire group of some of the allegedly some of the biggest names in American industry who hated him for various reasons and wanted to enact a coup to replace him with a military dictator. And you'd think this would be a much bigger deal in history books than it was, because they found out behind the scenes and the whole thing more or less died in committee, like in the back rooms of power. I imagine there were quiet conversations that were had and people were called to account and people were fired or warned, and the whole thing just went away with no violence happening. But this did happen. And so that made me think, I'm going to posit that there could have been, a assassination attempt, because could one have happened that, never hit the papers? Absolutely, it could have. And it made sense to me that if you're planning an assassination, you'd plan assassination for when you had a Russian female sniper in town to take the hit for you, or to take the fall, at least with the police. So that ended up sort of inspiring the assassination part of the plot. And that is no spoilers, that you learn about this assassination on literally page 1, the plot, that is. So that didn't come till later, and that meant that my original ending had to be sort of enlarged, but I did pretty much have the original ending that I planned on.
Fascinating. I guess this is maybe more of a question about maybe pacing and narrative structure. And it's about how, when you're taking so much that's based in history, real people, real historical accounts, and yet both of your books, obviously, read so well. They're exciting, they're propulsive, and, then they read like, a great work of fiction, which it is. But how do you craft that? How do you, plot it out in such a way that you have these touch points that are based in reality, but you're keeping that narrative pacing that's so important? Is, I guess that's more about your craft and how you do the magic you do.
Well, I am going to fall back on a Neil Gaiman quote that I saw just the other day, and I thought, wow, that is exactly right. He was asked how did he plot his books, and he said, write down what happens in the story in the first draft, and on the second draft, make it look like you knew what you were doing all along. I do a lot of plotting in advance. I try to do more with every book, because I am trying to get myself out of the very bad habit that I am in, where I write a massively way too long first draft, and then I have to cut 60,000 words. And this is the kind of thing, if you do for a whole career, I understand why writers have drinking problems, because it's not fun to cut 60,000 words out of a book. So I'm trying to plot more with every book to get myself away from that. And I'm getting a little better at it, I think. But, I always hit the point when I'm just like, why is it that I don't know how to plot a book when I've written so many? You'd think I would know what I was doing by now. And I always hit that point when I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. How about you, Beatriz?
Oh gosh, I literally every time I think, it's the classic thing. Every time you feel like you've never done this before whenever you sit down. And I think it's partly because, I have a problem. Like, I really hate writing the same thing over and over again. Like, each book has its own, its own flavor, its own color, its own, its own approach, its own subject matter. And so I do kind of feel like, and that does inform the pacing. And, but also readers' taste change. I think that we're, with our attention span, so that we want a really fast start, we want this really fast pacing, and so you need to adjust to, what your readers are prepared to sit through in terms of drawing out that exposition. So, I think I go through and again, I do try to plot at least somewhat in advance. I try to know where I'm going. I obviously, I sometimes have a little trouble figuring out where my starting point is going to be. And it's really just kind of points in between.
It's really hard to find the start. The start's the hardest.
Yeah. Sometimes I just be like, okay, I'll just get going. And then I can always go back and revise the beginning and say, oh, actually it needs to start a little bit earlier. It needs to start a little bit later. And I think but I think the further you get into this, the more you start to kind of second guess yourself, where you're like, oh God, am I doing this? Because you're thinking too much, you're overthinking it a lot. I think that you need to write as you would read, I mean, if I'm bored writing something, the reader is going to be bored reading it. So clearly I need to pick things up a little bit, cut something out, figure out what needs to be there. And the beautiful thing is I tend to try to just trust my subconscious. Like my subconscious, so many times it's kind of figured everything out. And I get toward the end and I'm like, oh my gosh, everything's fitting together. How did that happen? And it's like, trust your subconscious. Your subconscious kind of knows what it's doing. And then again, Neil is always right. Then you just go and make sure that as you go through, you kind of cut out the little bits that indicate that maybe you didn't really know where this was headed all along.
We have a question from our chat, actually from our own Virginia. We love both of your works in audio. Do either of you ever get to choose the narrators that do your audiobooks? Do you have any input into that?
For me, I had, for the Alice Network, they gave me a choice. They narrowed it down to 2 and they asked me who I preferred. And I really liked Saskia Marleveld. So I asked for her.
Love her. She's terrific.
And they did go with her. And she did such a good job that I have begged for her every single time since. And I've had a chance to meet her. And and pretty much as soon as I'm done with the book and like I know they're going to be looking at audio recordings soon, I will email Saskia and I'll ask her something like, hey, please tell me you can do a 500-page book sometime soon, and please tell me you can do a Russian accent. And then she will usually email back and say yes and yes. So I really enjoy working with her, and I'm so glad she's sort of like made the time to do all of mine so far, because I always request her now.
Yeah, same. I usually do, and partly because I often have books with 2 different point of view characters, so we go back and forth, and so I will get a choice for each one. And Saskia's done a few of my books, and she's terrific. And so I am not a huge audio person, not because I don't want to be, but because there's literally, I haven't arranged my life so that I have moments where I can sit down and listen to an audiobook or integrate it into something I'm already doing. So I am not an expert. I often defer to the expert, who's my agent, who listens to audio all the time, and she's very good at helping me pick through the auditions. But yeah, the amazing, but this is why I never actually read from my book while I'm on tour. They're like, oh, read from. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I will make a fool of myself compared to the incredible professionalism on display in the audio. Go get the audio if you want to hear it. I will tell you about the historical background and how I came to write it and all the fun stuff. If you want to hear the book read to you, the audio narrators can do way better than I can. Their accent, also I would screw the accents up abominably. So.
This is a question also for both of you. Do you have a favorite character from among all the books that you've written? And I would actually add an addendum to that. Are there certain characters that sort of live in your head way after that you've turned in your drafts or your manuscript?
Oh boy. Nina from the Huntress kind of lives on in me in a lot of ways. She was a lot of fun to write because, writers lead really quite sedate lives, and I'm okay with that. I am good with that, because if I'm not disciplined, I'm not going to get words down or books written, and quiet life is good for that. But she was someone who had no fears, no breaks, no filters. And it's fun to watch someone live their life that way. And it did kind of feel like that's what I was doing. Like she was living her life at top speed and yelling over her shoulder at me to keep up. And it was less about me writing her story than she was living it. So she's one that I still think about, and he does still live in my head. And she's a lot of fun to write. She really took over in a way that is a lot of fun when it happens for a writer.
Yeah, for me, obviously, Jen Kelly from my Wicked City series.
I love Jen. She's the best.
I love her. She's definitely, and having written 3 books now, and planning to write a 4th, going back into her skin is just like, I know her so well and I love her so much. And so she's really terrific. other than Jen, I think one character, more recently that's really gotten under my skin is Janie Everett from Her Last Flight. Was to me a character that was just so real and so, just wonderfully realized, certainly in my head as I was writing her. I hope it certainly transferred to the page. She was such a psychologically complex character, and she was not somebody, and she's narrating in the first person. She's not somebody who will tell you what she means. So as a writer, my challenge was to make it evident what she really meant and what she was really hiding and what she was really thinking behind this mask that she's wearing and the story that she's telling to you, the reader. But I loved her so much, and writing her was just one of the most wonderful immersive experiences I've had as a writer.
Oh, thank you both so much. I know we're a little bit over the hour, but this was fantastic. Like I said, I could listen to you both and be a fly on the wall all night long. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you all to our virtual and in-person attendees for joining, for submitting great questions. We are so grateful. As a reminder, anyone who attended tonight, you're gonna be eligible to get copies of both Beatriz's and Kate's books. We're gonna email you to let you know if you've been a lucky winner. You can come on by to the library to pick it up. Thank you again. Best of luck and happy summer and happy 4th to you both. And we'll see you on the other side. Take care and good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Happy summer.